Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to a new episode of the KFC Fake Podcast. I'm your boy, Kevin Davis, author, entrepreneur, comic creator, comic writer, a whole one different, multiple hats at once. But it's not about me today. Well, please welcome my new guest, Mr. C.E. Massari. It's great to meet you finally. And you reached out like a month ago, I believe, talking about your new Kickstarter that's going to be launching around September 15th or on September 15th. But first off, before we get to the nitty gritty, tell us who is Mr. C.E. Massari and what made you get into basically writing comics, like storytelling in general.
Yeah, I think I've always wanted to do it. It's always been something I've been interested in as long as I can remember. Even if I wasn't like super open with it with people. I got into we'll just say reading comics from like a lot of people. I guess probably from my generation was like the kids Fox Kids, WB Kids, like Toonami, all those kind of things. So animated Spider-Man, animated X-Men, Digimon, Pokemon,
Let's
what was
go.
ever running at that time, that's what I grew up on. And I really got interested in stories then. I could probably say like the direct relation to picking up comics, like the hard copies and actually going to conventions and stuff like that, came from a friend in fifth grade who brought in like his Daredevil comics. I was like, oh, these are pretty sweet. So me and another friend in my town were like, oh,
Let's go.
like, hey, like we're gonna go get these. So I went to a couple like they were like the original cons. Like a lot of people now think of conventions are like this big show. There's, all these cosplayers. It's nice. It's pretty. No, this was like, if anyone's familiar with the Holiday Inn in Philadelphia, that's right outside the sports stadiums. They did an episode on it, and It's Always Sunny in
Yeah,
Philadelphia. Like that's where like the first comic convention I went to, and it was like the little lobby conference areas,
holy
and it was like
smokes.
people who hadn't showered in God knows who long, and they were not like super I don't say friendly or they were mean or anything like that, but definitely was like a show. It was like, "Hey, you're gonna buy this or you're gonna leave my table," kind of thing. So that was my first experience. I actually ended up, I think, they I don't know if it was like tickets, like they did a raffle as you entered, so automatically by buying
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
ticket you
yeah.
got a raffle. I think I ended up like winning like $200 or $300. So I bought a bunch of books. I used these like little poker chips that they gave you that you could use throughout the con. So I bought a bunch of comics, but that's like how I got into it. And then just in my head, I just always had stories running, or I would like insert myself in the stories that I watched, and I would, create my own character, and I would just play around with things in my mind, kept me sane. And then as I got older, I didn't know exactly how that would translate into a career. I actually thought what I was going to do was to fight professionally in mixed martial arts. I was a big fan of Mayhem Miller. For anyone who's seen Bully Beatdown, I love Mayhem. I loved him as a fighter. Bully Beatdown was great, but as a fighter, his entrances walking out with like Japanese schoolgirls or doing like I can't remember the movie. It's where he says puts in the Baths, Clarice, whatever that is, like, oh, Hannibal Lecter mask and all this wild stuff. Like he was making pro wrestling entrances for MMA, and there wasn't too many people doing that. And Mayhem was just very eloquent. He could communicate well, fantastic personality. And I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, I might not be a great fighter, but I can definitely like market myself and be like, okay, let me build a reputation as a character outside of the ring, maybe inside. He's on top of people, he's choking people, and he's doing like peace signs and like stuff like this, and just he was constantly entertaining. And I think that pivoted him to his MTV show, which he hosted for several years, and then he got a movie deal and all this stuff. So I'm like, that I think is the avenue that I can actually pivot to my writing, which is what I really want to do. Like I had ideas for TVs, movies, comics, all these different things. But what ended up really pushing it to that next level was I was in college. I was a double major in philosophy and religious studies, and my other one was for history. I thought, oh, my backup plan to make my parents happy is I'll be a history teacher. The MMA thing, because it didn't end up working out, and the internet, as far as MMA, we'll call it journalism, was pretty young. Like it was just a lot of blogs, and Middle Easy was one of my favorites. Cage potatoes, these different things. I was like, I can do that. Like I'm doing it. I'm meeting these people. Like I have a really good understanding of the sport by participating in it. Like I feel like, again, this is egotistical, but it's like my opinion's right and yours is wrong. So that I ended up changing my major from history to sports journalism. And I was like, okay, well, I started writing for MMA blogs and, doing opinion pieces. And I wrote for a pro wrestling site for their MMA, interviewing fighters, this whole thing. And then at some point, it just kind of clicked in my head. I should be doing this with like comics. So I started writing for Ain't It Cool News. I was a press coordinator for Comics Verse. I did stuff for Monkeys Fighting Robots. I think I got like an article or two on like Screen Rant, except there's some other sites that I didn't end up writing for. But I was like, I'm gonna pivot now to comic stuff because that's really what I wanna do, and the best way to learn how to do it would be to interview creators. So, like, my first convention that I went to was New York Comic Con, and I got to go to a bunch of junkets and stuff like that. Rick and Morty before they got really big, Mike Tyson when Mike Tyson's Adult Swim TV show was on, so I got to meet those guys. But Scott Snyder was one of the first people that I interviewed at a big convention. And I got to talk to him, and the questions I would always ask everyone is like, what do you do to break in? What is your advice for people who want to break in? How do you become a content creator? All of these things. So as I'm going through all these interviews over the years and I'm networking and I'm meeting people, the big thing that I was always doing on the back end, because I think it's just good for content. Because even if you don't want to become a comic creator, people are interested. Like, how does a sausage get made? Like, how does this thing happen? What is the creative ends to things? So it worked out as content, but really like the secret thing in my back of my head was like, all right, I'm going to take this information and I'm going to pivot to comics. And thanks to that relationship, that's kinda how I did it. I made those networks. I met those people. One of those relationships is with Dirk Manning, the publisher of SourcePoint Press that my book, The Mafia vs. Clan's coming out on, and that was 10, 12 years ago. I think it was 2015 or 2016 at New York Comic Con, and I kept that relationship going, that relationship built. He started doing stuff for SourcePoint on his own kind of creative journey. So because my relationship with Dirk, I would then spend time with the SourcePoint guys when I was at cons. So I got to meet their CEO, I got to meet their other people. So pivot to 2026. They already know who I am. They know a face to the name, whole nine yard. So when you're putting forth that pitch package, they're like, oh, we know this guy. He's been around for a while. He's put in the time. He's put in the effort. We know what he's like. And that's kind of been the journey so far.
That's legit the biggest thing when you're in like any type of business. You have to get
But yeah,
years into the comic book like entertainment industry.
yeah, yeah,
Crazy thing is, everyone be shocked when I tell people this, but I did not grow up reading comics at all. But I've always been a Marvel and DC fan because of the animations and the
yeah, yeah,
movies and the TV shows. And you actually spoke one of the shows I watched was like the Amazing Spider-Man. Like on Saturday, like Saturday morning, the Amazing
yeah,
Spider-Man
yeah,
animation, the X-Men animation, and then I mean you also mentioned Pokemon. I haven't played Pokemon since I don't know how long now.
yeah,
Man,
yeah.
completely forgot about Pokemon. I was a huge Pokemon fan. I was a huge Dragon Ball Z fan,
Yep. Dragon Ball
and
Z. Yeah,
I got into comics in 2020 when like the COVID era, as you call
yeah,
it. And I wanted to like just like stimulate my brain with something because I don't want to be on like media all the freaking time because that
yeah,
like
yeah.
watch your brain. And so I don't want to watch TV all freaking day. You know what I mean? And so I got on this TikTok thing because it was like very high during that time because everyone trying to entertain themselves and stuff like that. I got on it. I was doom scrolling, and one moment, like one day, Marvel comes on my like my for you page, and I was expecting like a movie announcement or like a trailer or something. Like, are you getting back to some movies now? No, it was their comic books, and I was like, wait a minute, what the heck is this? I was like, what is a comic book? And so, and then DC popped up there showing me some of their new comic books too. I'm like, okay, what the crap is this comic book thing that they're talking about? Is this something new? Or then I went to their websites and seen thousands of books on
Yeah, yeah,
that.
their
I'm
digital
like,
library's massive.
what the crap? I was like, have I been in such a deep hole my entire life? I did not know this existed. Like, I'm not nerd enough because I did not know that this existed. I was like, I don't deserve my nerd card because I missed out on this like since forever. Because even though I grew up on like the animation stuff, but now I understand what people say. That's not like how the character is in their book or in their comic. I was like, when they watch the movies and stuff, I'm like, now I understand it. And like legit, one of my like, I legit go back like watching their live action stuff and stuff again after reading their comics. Now I look at them differently now. And I was like, even the ones I love so much now, I actually learn their source material. I was like, okay, why did they change that character? The comic book character it was so much better than what they did in the movie. Like, why did they change that character for? Like, come on, like what the crap? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times, and I always wonder, like, how much of that is the producers, how much of that is, like, the writing staff and, like, their level of I don't wanna say competency is probably the wrong term, or even like, "Hey, we got this actor and the way that's written here doesn't really fit them." Like, yeah, I'm always curious. I actually know I met him, it was probably a few years ago. He's a friend of a friend who works on all the Marvel Studio movie, so he's been doing it since, 2016, 2017. So all the Marvel projects, he's been on. He's a really cool guy. I hope to meet him again. Like I said, he's a friend of a friend. When I was out in San Diego Comic-Con, he was there, but he does all the movies, and he had, some pretty interesting insight on some of that stuff where there is a lot of like, "Hey, here's the source material stuff," but then on the other side, there's a lot of, the normal unfortunate, less glamorous studio stuff where they're like, "Oh, well, this demographic or this money or, this isn't gonna work." And, what is the director like the direct or not sorry, the director and the writer, like, what are their visions for this story? And sometimes they just deviate. They're like, "Yeah, I'm writing Ant-Man, but really I wanna write, a horror movie. I'm just making something up here." So they're like, "How do I pigeonhole Ant-Man into a horror movie?"
Now, I just want to get into your comic, Mafia versus the Clan. First off, congratulations on this book. It was like what, 200 pages, I think, or 120 pages,
A
I
hun
believe.
120.
120-page graphic novel. It's like your spoiler-free elevator pitch of what the
Yeah.
story is before we deep dive into it.
Yeah, so the elevator pitch is essentially it's John Wick meets The Godfather. It's based on some true life events in my grandfather's life, and it's very much a story where on the surface it's an action story, it's a revenge story, but I've tried to quote unquote spread my philosophical, theological, and my writer's wings. I'm gonna really bring forth like the comic medium to the best of my abilities as a writer, and then with my artist Martin Jimenez, I think he's done an absolutely fantastic job of taking everything that's from that story direction, the script, and bring it to life. But if you like revenge stories, if you like, John Wick, if you like The Godfather, that's the best mix that I can give. And at most, like if the title itself doesn't sell you, then you're just not gonna like the book. Like the Mafia versus the Clan, like that alone should be like, oh, that's interesting. I definitely want to, read about that. So that tagline, that title, I mean, I think that sells itself.
I saw the title. I'm saying I'm interested in interviewing you. Yes, you can get my show. I didn't even read the full email. I just saw the tagline, Mafia versus Clan. I was like, interesting. And then I read the email
Yep,
asking you.
yep.
I was like, oh. I was like, okay, yes. Let's hook this up. Let's sign this up, man. And yes, I'm a huge fan of John Wick. I love the entire franchise. I'm a huge fan of The Godfather, so I'm sold on the book already. Uh, who's watching this, the Kickstarter is on pre-launch right now. As you're watching this video is in the description of this episode. So make sure you follow the pre-launch as it launches September 15th, guys. Remember that date so you can back this book and it gets funded first day. That's going to put that out there.
And we have a really sweet thing going on that pre-launch page, and we'll have it up once it's live. You can read the first 22 and 24 pages for complete free. I have that much confidence that once you see that big banner there, free 22, I think it's 22 or 24 page preview, you'll click on that, you'll see the story, you'll see the art, and it ends on a big cliffhanger, which I think is the perfect way to draw people in for the overall campaign. And then once the Kickstarter ends, it'll be available to larger distribution via SourcePoint Press, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, your local comic shop, all that fun stuff. The Kickstarter really is for me to make some money on the back end. So SourcePoint is very creator friendly in the way that they want creators to make money. As the big publisher, they don't make a whole lot. They're not trying to make a whole lot. So anyone who's a SourcePoint creator, and if anyone's interested and has a book idea, they are open for submissions. Just go on their website. You'll see their guidelines, what they need to see, and all that stuff. But they are actively looking for submissions. What they're trying to do is like give power to the creator. So for any creator, you're running a Kickstarter, it's for us to make some money on the back end that SourcePoint won't touch so that we can, recoup some costs on the art production, on the book production, all that, again, unfun stuff because comics cost money, especially from the independent side. And then after the Kickstarter, then like I say, it goes to the global distribution for whether you're a digital reader or you want the hard copy as well. Plus, which this is the most important part, the Kickstarter cover is a one-time print run. So anyone who participates in the Kickstarter, that cover will be the only time it is ever printed and will be exclusive to you as the Kickstarter backer as our thank you that, hey, you get this collector's item cover. What gets printed out to the world is going to be something completely different. Like I said, we will never print this cover for the story ever again.
Talking about the Kickstarter, let me actually bring it up right quick so guys can see it on the pre-launch page. Can you see that?
Yep. We're 3
It's
followers away from hitting our first, we'll call it first day backer or first day follower goal, which are up
48.
48. So we need two more, just two more. And we hit our first freebie. So the first freebie, once we hit 50, is everyone will get who's a first day backer or a follower, because it's hard to track on Kickstarter. You will get a free annual subscription to my Substack, which is a $30 value. Once we hit 100, you'll start getting some physical freebies from other comics I've written sent to you that are collector's items, won't be printed again, completely for free. So every time we hit 50 more followers, so 50, 100, 150, 200, there's always going to be a freebie that gets added on. There's that free 22-page preview. You click on that link, you'll get to see the book, you'll get to read through it. I've got full confidence that the cliffhanger it ends on will, have you coming back for the full Kickstarter, and you can kind of see the artwork that Martin Jimenez has absolutely killed. He's got a perfect mix of like a cinematic, real life visual style, but also gritty noir that I think really ties together the book and its themes of the Mafia versus the clan.
Excuse me, and it's a full black and white with like some color scales on it.
So,
I think that's just
so
called.
our first, we'll call it, I forget what they call it. It's when you go over. So it will be black and white unless once we start hitting some stretch goals, it'll be that red color and stuff like that. It'll be like a Sin City. This is my ultimate vision for is I want to do a Sin City, very select red for blood, for fire, for religious items, for very select things to have that red stand out. The only way to make that stand out is once we get our stretch goals going, that's going to be one of the stretch goals. So the book will be in black and white, noir. Once we go past those stretch goals, we'll start hitting some color.
I believe. It's like, can you
Yes.
give
So this, yes.
like a backstory as to like what happened and like what basically what is the real life event that happened that inspired you
Yes.
to do the story?
Yeah, so the real life events are related to my grandfather and some events that happened in his life. They're a fictional retelling, but a lot of them are very real. It's just a matter of blending them together to hit a fictional narrative that makes sense, and that makes sense for a reader because they were kind of scattered throughout his life, and I needed to weave them together to make them work. Ultimately, the original idea for this came from my dad. He was watching a military channel episode called "The Mafia versus the KKK." It was like, "Oh, this would be a really cool idea for a comic book." I was like, yeah, it would. So I watched the episode and I was like, oh, there's some great themes here. It was really interesting. Things that I just didn't know about how when you look at the historical events, like the KKK were very much wrapped into like prohibition and obviously like anti-immigration of the early 1900s and 1800s and those things. But in particular around prohibition, the mafia were an immigrant group, Italians. They were doing something that was illegal by the Constitution, and the prohibition groups, which the Klan fell under, there was the normal animosity, but on top of that, what made the mafia very unique is that if you look at like the old school, like Frank Sinatra's, Rat Packs and that group of people, it was Italians, it was Jewish Americans, and it was African Americans. And within that little group, they also had white women who were dancing, they were drinking, and they were doing things that were outside the norms. Not calling the mafia progressive by any means, but by the standards of the time, it was a multicultural group of people through the music, through, like I said, the speakeasies, those kind of elements. So watching that episode, I was like, oh, this is a great idea to kind of tie together some stuff I knew about my grandfather. And then I deep dived some more history and found out some more information. So, for example, that is a real prayer card for my great aunt Augustina, who the story is very heavily based around. So, the KKK element is my grandfather. He owned a restaurant in Chesapeake, Virginia, when my dad was real young, and the KKK apparently had picketed his restaurant at some point in time. I don't know how many times, but I know it was at least once. From the sources I can get, which from my grandfather to my cousin, as well as from my dad and my aunt. They didn't like that one, he was an Italian who owned a business, and two, one thing that did not jive with them or, did not make them happy was obvious. He had a lot of African American cooks and he would drive them to and from work. He'd eat lunch with them, he'd hang out with them, he would just kind of, shoot the breeze, whatever. He would just, hey, these are my workers, I'm hanging out with them. They need help, I'm going to help them out. So not only was he an immigrant who owned a business in the South, he was also, helping and acting he was crossing that kind of racial divide as an individual with the African American workers in his restaurant. Now, my dad doesn't remember a whole lot around the time. He's probably about 5 or 6. He says the only thing that he can like specifically remember was he called it this like stereotypical big country guy kind of came in and more or less told my grandfather to leave town. And so my grandfather, in so many words, told him to screw off. Those are like the real key elements from that time period that I pulled from as the inspiration for the larger aspect of the book, which is the Mafia element, and then, of course, the clan element. So taking that clan element, there needed to be kind of a crux or you know, a linchpin or a explosion point for the rest of the book to make it make sense. That's where Augustina comes in. So there's always this story in my family's, we'll call it family lore, family history, that my grandfather had a sister and she was murdered. We didn't know the details. We weren't told the details. He never told anyone, and the only information actually came from my grandmother, his wife, about he had a sister and she died. So the little information we had was she was killed by somebody who was either a stalker, a jaded lover. We weren't sure if the person was trying to kill Augustina. Were they trying to kill her mother, my great grandmother Felicia, or were they trying to kill my grandfather Mario, her brother? All we knew. So I found out I qualify for dual Italian citizenship. I'm on ancestry.com. I'm trying to do like some document collection because I have to present it to my lawyer and then eventually the Italian government to prove my citizenship. So because Ancestry works with like AI and certain website scrubbing that normal Google doesn't, it pulled this document that was her death certificate from the Philadelphia police. It was like Augustina Massari, 3 shots, because it had pinged to my grandfather for information. Like, holy crap, this is her. Showed it to my dad. He's like, oh wow, I never knew her name. So my dad grew up knowing that his father had a sister who was murdered, but never knew her name was Augustina until I found this document. So this is where like the real story information came. I deep dived her entire history. I found out that her death was this giant event in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia community. It went up to state papers. It was widely followed. She was essentially murdered by, she was 16. She was murdered by a middle-aged, 40-something-year-old Italian man, Italian American, who was renting out a room from my great grandmother. So my great grandfather, Eduardo, had died when my grandfather was about 2 or 3. My great grandmother, Felicia, is an Italian immigrant who spoke next to no English until the time she died. So it's the Great Depression. Obviously, she's got to make money. She's renting out this room. This man, who I'm pretty sure is, at least from the newspaper reports and looking at some of the quotes and doing my amateur historian kind of analysis, was likely like manic schizophrenic, manic bipolar, and had some serious mental issues and probably belonged in an asylum. And I'm surprised he wasn't at this time. But he's a middle aged 40-year-old man. At some point, Augustina or my grandfather or my great uncle had done something to this man that was pissing him off. He was trying to be essentially their father, the father figure in the house, and they weren't having it. He slapped Augustina. My great grandmother Felicia was like, "All right, you're out." They kicked him out. The man, the murderer, saw Augustina at church. I think it was like a week or two later. She kind of snubbed him, ignored him. He tried talking to her. She, wouldn't give him any mind. He made like a very vague threat about how death was gonna be at her doorstep or something like that, and at some point in time, he came back to their house. He entered the residence. He told my great-grandmother Felicia, she's like, "I left some paperwork in my room. Can you go get it?" Great-grandmother goes up to get the paperwork. He takes out a gun. He shoots her 3 times. My great-grandfather is asleep at the table. He was selling newspapers at 10 years old. Again, Great Depression, have to put food on the table. He was exhausted, possibly from school and working or just working. Wakes up, grabs a butcher knife, chases the man who just killed his sister out of the house, with a gun, and tries to kill him. Now, eventually, the guy gets away. I think it was maybe a day later that the police end up catching him. But there's like a mob of 400 or 500 people of the Italian American community trying to break into the police car, trying to rip this guy out. They're trying to, get some vigilante justice because he killed Augustina. So there was this huge thing. She had this procession in one of the major streets in Philadelphia. I ended up finding a lot of information about a vague story in my family's history was this giant event in history. And so her death, I'm giving a little bit of spoiler away here, but I'm also not, because if you see John Wick, the death of the dog, that's what kind of pushes the movie forward. So Augustina's death in the book, like real life, is what pushes this story forward. That's within that first 22, 24 pages, and then you have 100 pages more of story. Now, within that 100 page of story, I'm weaving in a lot of little like Easter eggs and stuff about my grandfather's history. He was not in the mob, so I got to make that clear. He was not a main man, but he did know a lot of people from the South Philly and the Philadelphia Mafia. I'm still trying to understand the extent of that through my dad and a little bit of my aunt. Problem is, all my sources are unfortunately dead. They're gone. So I can only get so much information. But my dad did tell me two names that he remembers and stick out to him. It's Frankie Flowers. So Frankie Flowers was a bookie for the mob. You know, the mob will say no, but if you look at like the newspaper records, Frankie Flowers was killed because he did something or upset the mob in some way, but he was their bookie. My grandfather had some kind of relationship with him because he had left the city for 20 years. He ended up coming back. He needed a job. He was laid off. Frankie Flowers offered my grandfather a job. Now, you don't offer someone a job after being out of an area for 20 years and coming back without some kind of intimate relationship. My grandfather ultimately said no. My dad was trying to be a cop, so he didn't want to affect my dad's job and his career. But again, someone who is in those circles that Frankie was within, you're not offering that to someone, one, you don't trust, you don't know, or have some intimate relationship with. The other name that my dad mentioned is Chicken Man Testa. Chicken Man Testa, if you look him up, was one of the Mafia in Philadelphia. He was one of their leaders, one of the heads. I That's a little more vague as far as my dad's information and what he knows. He just like he's like my grandfather mentioned a name or mentioned he knew him or something to that effect. That could mean a whole lot of things. Was it someone like, hey, you knew just from the neighborhood? Was that someone you knew face to face, like we all have acquaintances? Was it someone you went to school with? Did they know each other through Augustina's murder? Because, like I said, I found out through just a lot of newspaper and research. That was a huge event in the Italian American community in Philadelphia at the time. So everybody knew about her death. Everyone knew about her murder. Was that the connecting point? Like, I don't know with Testa what the connection point was to my grandfather. So that's a little more vague. But I've got a lot of little Easter eggs and things throughout from my grandfather's life and things that I learned throughout that story. That's a really long answer, but there's a lot of information. Like I said, Augustina's murder in itself is something I would like to write a book on because the story is extremely interesting. If anyone is interested in the full story, there's a podcast called the Italian American Stories Podcast. They did like an hour-long deep dive, kind of like a true crime episode on Augustina and the murder. Did a great job, fantastic job for anyone who wants to hear about her story. This is a fictionalized version. This is changed. So like you see there with the butcher knife. That's like my call
Right
out
here.
to, yep, right there. So that call out with that butcher knife is the same thing. Like I said, my grandfather was 10 years old and he's trying to chase his sister's killer with a butcher knife. He's trying to chase a middle-aged man, just watch his sister die with a butcher knife. So that's kind of my call out as an Easter egg there, which ties into a little bit of my trepidation of my mixed feelings with the book, which is because it's so connected to my grandfather and it affected him his entire life. He 100% had PTSD. He grew up seeing mob violence. My dad did mention that, he did see hits. He saw the dead bodies. He saw things that happened in Philadelphia growing up. He was also affected by Augustina's death up until the time my grandfather died. He had night terrors. My cousin said when he would sleep over and like go get a glass of water from the kitchen, my grandfather just kind of be sitting on the couch smoking a cigarette in the dark. And you don't really click that until now. It's like that's just him not being able to sleep. When my one of my aunts was getting a divorce, he was having like physical night terrors, like waking up violently because he thought his daughter was going to be killed by her husband in the divorce. Like that's what he thought was going to happen. My dad said at some point in probably the 70s or 80s, he sought psychiatric help. I mean, you have to think how pushed he was because mental health wasn't a thing in the 70s and 80s, especially for, an Italian American, Italian immigrant, or an immigrant of any kind. Like there's a different machismo that went along with that. So you have to think how bad was he at in a mental state to reach that point. Even up until the point where the murderer was released from prison, there was somebody who was reaching out to my grandfather, letting him know, hey, this guy's getting out. Do you plan on doing anything? My aunt says the only reason she thinks that my grandfather didn't end up going after the guy after he was released from prison was because he had kids and he didn't want it to affect, them in any way. But it was definitely something that affected him his entire life, you know, emotionally, very deeply. It scarred him to his core. So this is definitely a love story to my family, but it's a love story that I've got mixed feelings about for obvious reasons. Luckily, all the parties are no longer around, so it makes that a little more comfortable as, hey, this is in memory of them. This is in memory of my family. This is a love story to them, and it's not going to affect them negatively in any way. It's definitely not something I would have approached if they were still living.
Shit was gonna lead to my next question. When you was like writing the story, was like the process of creating it, was it more emotional writing this, especially dealing with the real events?
Yeah, I would actually say it's probably been the most emotional for my dad and my aunt. One of my aunts, she passed some years ago from pancreatic cancer. So I've only got one aunt and then my dad. They definitely, I've had like multiple conversations with my dad about this. This has definitely made them understand their father in a different light because they didn't know the details of the murder. They just knew that she died and he was there when she was shot. Hearing about the fact that she was shot in front of him and he ran out after the killer, there's in the newspaper reports, there's actually reports when they're going to court that my grandfather, again, as a 10-year-old child, 10-year-old child is trying to reach across and jump the man. As the man's being brought to the court, my grandfather is literally trying to bum rush and is screaming, I'm going to kill you to this man. So things like that really impacted my grandfather. I mean, it impacted me. Like I get goosebumps just saying that. Like my 10-year-old grandfather watched his sister die and is trying to murder this man with his bare hands. Like that's impactful. One of the things that I think emotionally really helped me write it or approach it was just thinking about my own kids. Like if someone did this to one of my children, like how would I react? What level of revenge would I go to? Like how emotional would I be if I lost all these things? And that's the crux of the story for the fictional character Mario. So the character himself, he is a typical Italian American, typical Italian. He's Catholic. He's just trying to go to work, go to church, and call it a day. Work hard, American dream, whole 9 yards. In the book, after Augustine is dead, he's trying to go to police, they're not helping. He's trying to go all these means, and there's some worse things that have not revenge. Again, not giving up the Christianity part of the Catholicism part, the heaven and hell part. It's essentially he is so willing to get his revenge that he's acknowledging heaven and hell exist, but he'll go to hell because he wants this earthly revenge. Like that's how he's pushed as a human being. He is so hurt. He is so emotionally hurt. He is so willing to give everything up, earthly and heavenly, because he wants to get this revenge and justice for his daughter that was, unjustly killed. So that's like a big driving emotional force. And I tried to really blend as a parent, as a father, like how would I feel? And how can I write that emotion into a character about having that emotional impact?
To 120 pages, man.
Yeah,
Congratulations on this book, man, especially enduring through that process, especially with your family and getting this out. One, I gotta say, I'm proud of you.
I appreciate it.
Story like this, especially with it's about your personal life, and that's a very difficult thing to do.
Oh, it is. And
That's what that watches this and hears this story. Make sure you follow this campaign. They're on Kickstarter right now. It's in the description of this video. It launches September 15th. And also make sure you check out the 22-page preview to see what you think and see if you become a potential backer. Because just from hearing from the creator himself, this sounds like a powerful story and has a lot of lore, and especially with dealing with real events. Make sure you get these numbers up and get the second, make sure this is successful. Because I think this is a little bit. I'm not sure if I can say really good story because it's based on true events. I'm like, it's an intense story, but I know
it's
you say you
intense, it's
fictionalized it a
gritty, and
bit,
it's
but
grounded.
yeah, I was like, but stories like this is it's tough to write. I love, I've actually starting to fall in love with new war stories too. Like I just now getting into it. So if you're Godfather, make sure you follow this campaign and back it when it launches September 15th, guys. I, and I'm not sure this is going to spoil anything, but is there like a particular scene that you found that was most difficult to write?
To write. Difficult is probably the wrong term. I would say it's gone through a lot of different iterations. So this originally started as a 5-page script. For anyone who's familiar with the Comics Experience Intro to Writing course, it's a great course. Great instructors, Andy Schmidt from Marvel. He's now, I think, Boom's editor in chief. Paul Aller, who's done everything from like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and a bunch of other like Dark Horse Image books. They run the course. Andy was a huge help, but it started off as a 5-page preview, taking that original concept from the Military Channel episode, and like, hey, speakeasies and the multicultural aspect and Mafia clan, this clash, that kind of stuff. And then as I found out more information about my family, then it was a matter of integrating that in there and then making it flow in one way. So it was like a really big puzzle. When that puzzle got shifted around, I had a literary agent for a few years. It ended up not working out, but she had a little bit of a hand and like, hey, I think this piece needs to fit here and this piece needs to fit here. Or because again, comics are comics. Like when we watch movies, like you can watch a scene of somebody talking for like 30 minutes. I'm making up a number here. It's not that bad. But if you try to read a comic for pages and it's just talking heads for like two, three, four, five, 6 pages, like you can't do long narratives and dialogues and monologues in comics. So you have to be able to get the right amount of talking and then switch to action and fit everything in, like I said, into a specific flow. For anyone who's familiar with Aubrey Sitterson and his series Free Planet on Image, Aubrey Substack is a huge, huge, huge impact on how I approach this story. He was trying to approach Free Planet, and the way he describes it is he wanted to take the comics medium and really play into the medium itself. What makes comics great? Well, episodic TV, you can take 12 episodes and have all these like little arcs that tie together to the long story. Or, a movie, it's like you got to have your 3 arc structure, but it has to go up and down because you have your hour and a half, 2 hours to fit it in. Comics have their own play and their own medium quirks and specialties that are even different if you're reading manga versus like Western comics. Like there's certain things that play into the way these are built. So I try to take what makes comics and graphic novels great, the visuals, fitting those pieces in and just making all the threads fit. So I don't say it was hard, but it's the iterations of like constantly taking moving parts and moving them around so they flow and they make the comic, the graphic novel, the one shot, making it powerful, making it make sense, and making it fit as a narrative. Because it is based on history, you can't take like something that happened to my grandfather at 10 and then, 50 and 35 and make it all make sense. So there has to be a little bit of creative play on how that all fits.
Side of comics that I don't think is like talked about
Yeah.
enough. I know you partner with Source Point Press, I believe you said.
Yes.
You talked a bit on it a little bit earlier, how you started networking and like you built that relationship with these. But how was the process when you officially got to the publishing side of it? Tell us like the process with that part of this on that side
Yeah.
after you finished the book.
So the business part, at least my experience is probably a little different than I would say the traditional. And that's because I know Dirk and I know Josh, and it's not like I got picked because they just like me. I actually had my first creator-owned book, The Six Swords. I pitched it to Source Point, I think like 2018, 2019. I got denied. They told me no. This was after 2 successful Kickstarters. It wasn't right for them at the time, and I understand and no hard feelings. But getting to Source Point has been a creative check mark that I wanted to hit for a long time. So what ended up happening was that I call this like my time arc, or you're in Naruto and Dragon Ball Z and everything. There's like a period where someone's a kid and then they're a teenager and they're super powerful. So when I started in comics 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of conventions. I said I had the Six Swords. There was things going on, family life and whatever happened. So I took about a 6 to 8 year break because I just didn't have the finances to fund anything. But I had a lot of time to write. I had a lot of time to gain experience, to research, all that fun and good stuff. So as I'm looking to start a book, I had looked searched for an artist for a completely different book. This is like I'm trying to not go into everything that I'm doing, but like I was working with an agent. It didn't work out. I had some material done. I had a couple books done with some pitch pages, and I'm like, all right, let me try to get these up. So I'm looking for a new artist. The artist Martin Jimenez, he had responded, sent me an email. He gave me his information. He's like, hey, here's my stuff. I'm like, holy crap, you're not right for this book that I posted, but you're perfect for this other idea I had. So what I was going to do with Martin is I was going to do a normal like Kickstarter route. Okay, I'm going to do 22 pages, kickstart it, refund my money, see where I'm at financially, then boom, do issue 2. Do the same thing. Boom, issue 3, issue 4, issue 5. Do the plug and play safe bet so I'm not killing my finances off the gate like I'd done with the Six Swords. Now, as I'm posting artwork, I'm posting information, Dirk sends me a message. He's like, hey man, when do you think you can get that book done by? I'm like, well, that depends on what you mean by that. Like, why are you asking? So he's like, look, if you can get me together a pitch package and you can get this book done by the end of the year, we'd like to, I think you have a really good chance of getting published at SourcePoint. So I'm like, all right, cool. Put together a pitch package, did all that kind of stuff, submitted it. He got greenlit, and then, it's really between the end of the year, 2026, beginning of 2027, depending on the book gets printed, when it will go to that larger distribution. The way that SourcePoint is kind of doing their model, I don't know how familiar you are with independent comics or your audience, But most of the time, we'll use like Action Lab, and I don't like to use Action Lab because if there's some people who were affected, and also I business wise, I don't like naming names just for professionalism's sake, but I'll use Action Lab as an example, or no, I was just say made up comic company number one. They print 1,000 books, they only sell 20. Okay. Well, they do this new book, they print 1,000 books, they sell 500, and you do this every single time. There's no way as a model, as a company, you're always in the red. You're never, ever, ever, ever breaking even. A lot of these companies will try to boost their numbers with, a celebrity being attached or some gimmick or something or whatever, but the books never match the sales. I remember talking to Dirk, I think it was like 2024. This was like post COVID. A lot of publishers are going under, this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, hey, how come anyone hasn't like fully embraced Kickstarter? Like, do all of your pre whatever you want to call it on Kickstarter, see what your numbers are, and then publish books. He kind of had like that look, that wink in his eyes, like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm pretty sure he already had this in his back of his mind before he eventually took over SourcePoint. But when he did, he is doing that model. If you're a creator, you submit to SourcePoint, you go through the pitch package, you get accepted. What SourcePoint is going to be like, we want X amount of book, or we're gonna take your books and we're gonna publish them. We're gonna put them into the world, but you have to create them because we're not gonna lose on the back end of printing 1,000 books and only selling 20. What we want to see is that your book is marketable. So if you give us 500 books, here's our contract, you get this percent, I get this percent, but we're going to push all 500 books wherever you want, but we're not going to overpublish. We're not going to have a warehouse full of all these books and they don't go anywhere, so that they could stay, one, financially viable, they can stay active for creators, they can have all the, bells and whistles. We'll get you in Amazon, we'll get you in Barnes and Noble, we'll get you in comic shops. They have all those tentacles out there, but they're not going to overpublish. And I think it's should be the future for everybody. And so for me, like I said, with the Kickstarter, it's so I recoup my funds, I print my books, and then once I print them, I give them the source point, and they do all the marketing. They get it into stores. They have to pay the price because if people don't know, which I don't know, again, I don't know how your audience knows about like the inner workings of independent comics, but you have to pay like a price to get into the little free booklet that a comic shop will get. Like, here I'm CE Massari's publisher. Well, here's my books coming out. Well, you have to pay to solicit that in a comic shop. So that whole process of getting in shops and that stuff, SourcePoint takes care of. They get everything on Amazon. They do all the marketing. They do all that stuff. You just have to get them the product so that, again, they are never going under. I think it's the smartest thing. I think Kickstarter, Indiegogo, whatever you use from crowdfunding is a phenomenal, phenomenal method because you know what your audience is. You get your exact numbers. And if you don't fund, you're not out money. Well, you are out money for how much ever you paid to create the book, but you're not out money in the same way that you would be if you go with the old model. So yeah, that's kind of how it came together. I actually signed for a second book with SourcePoint. Once this releases, I would like to get out next year. For anyone who's an anime fan, the elevator pitch for that is Soul Eater meets BPRD. Huge Soul Eater fan. Love the way Soul Eater did stuff. So if you like the Soul Eater supernatural kind of horror stuff,
Yes, I do.
hey, so when that's ready, you'll get an email for that too. We'll talk about it then. Yeah, so that's the next thing. So if you're, and again, anyone, I want to help fellow creators, like people have helped me get to where I'm at. If you want to submit to SourcePoint, come with your pitch package and then be ready to market the hell out of your book, Kickstarter it, get your printeds, and so they don't do floppies. They have to be a completed graphic novel. On SourcePoint, they have their entire submissions because floppies don't sell like graphic novels. Again, got to think business wise, got to keep the company going. Graphic novels do better. Get that stuff together. SourcePoint will take whatever you have and they'll market it. They'll get it to everyone else. They won't touch your Kickstarter money. The only contractual, we'll call it monies, that SourcePoint takes is from the actual sales post Kickstarter, and they don't touch your money cons wise either.
That's actually what I'm starting to do now with my books, because I'm actually transitioning my books into more paperbacks and like hardcovers. I started to notice that too because it's like a full arc story, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna start doing that now. I might because honestly, I got tired of printing floppies myself. I'm not gonna lie. As a publisher myself, I'm like, I love a good, just a good paper.
Yeah.
buying some indie books and like getting their graphic novels. They just feel so freaking good. They print so crispy, if they crispy, if that makes sense. Well, I'm like,
No, no, I
okay,
get it.
yeah. I was like, so yeah, I'm transitioning to more of a paperback style now books. That's why my next Kickstarter, which is my novel Skin Shifter, this is just chapter one of Skin Shifter, is going to be printed as a more of a trade paperback. That's not a floppy. That's going to be a full fledged no staple. That's the full fledged paperback, and then like sometime like next year, it's going to be the full graphic novel arc of the first of the first art of Skin Shifter.
If you're trying to get it widely distributed, like I said, Source Point is they're looking for new creators. You got any ideas, just send it their way.
So shout out to you guys, Source Point Press, and to you guys that's watching. Make sure you get Mafia versus the Clan on Kickstarter. It launches September 15th. I want to make sure I stress that while you're watching this. And the pre-launch is in the link. I mean, Jesus Christ, is the link is in the description of this
No, it's
video.
all good.
Tongue twister, Jesus Christ. But before, I always try to end an episode with like some fun questions after we get through all the work. Like to be like an icebreaker. One, so first question: if Mafia versus the Clan became like a movie tomorrow, who would you think be like your dream director, like to direct your project?
So I think I thought about this before, and I think where I landed on was Francis Coppola, who did The Godfather. I think it just makes sense. I understand like it's old school, but I think there needs to be a little bit of an old school flair to this. Like it has to be grounded. I think one of the ways that I describe this is like I'm a huge Tarantino fan, but Tarantino, like if you watch a Tarantino movie, it's like, hey, it's wild and it's over the top and
Yep,
it's sensationalized.
I've seen
So
all his
that's
movies,
kind of
so
like
yes.
it's like someone's getting chopped. Like this, I just think is better as a grounded raw kind of story, like, it's more realistic, like, you could believe, like, "Hey, you opened up a history book and, like, this happened in there," like, that's what I'm going for. Like, another way is, like, WWE versus MMA, like, Tarantino's WWE. You know your progression, you know it's a work, you know that there's gonna be these highs and lows in your story, but that's what entertains you. Being brought into this story, that's what entertains you. But MMA, it's like, oh, this fight could suck. It could be fantastic, but there's like this raw grittiness of like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of, like I said, it's a little more grounded, it's a little more dirty. That's where I think like Coppola would fit in with the way The Godfather is, bringing in the cultural and the ethnic aspect, but also grounding it because nothing's over the top. So, and again, also Coppola's Coppola, and that would be sweet.
Which actor would you love to see like play your lead character?
Ugh, that is a tough one I have not thought about. That's a really difficult question. I can't think of any I can't think of any paisan off the top of my head who are in that 40 range. That's a good one. That would actually be a question that I would put to the audience. I would like after people read the story to do like a vote on who they think would fit with the character. Because I honestly, that is a very good question I've not thought about. You stumped me.
I try
Now I
my
gotta think
best. I
about
try my
this.
best. All right, let's go to if you could have one dinner. I mean, if one dinner. If you could have a dinner with like a historical figure connected to like this era of your book,
Dinner with a historical figure from this era of my book. I'd want to say my grandfather for obvious reasons, but I'm not gonna do the cop out. I will do the famous figure. I will say Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt just is like one of the most interesting presidents in presidential history. He just checks every box and he's an absolute madman. I just think like hang out with him, we'd probably go hunting, go wrestle, and then like, jump off a bridge all in one day. So
oh my god,
he
I
seems
love
like a
it.
wild guy
I
to spend some
freaking
time with.
love it. What's like one comic, movie, or a novel that heavily influenced your storytelling style?
Good question. I get
You can also pick
there's
one from each one, like comic, movie, TV show, or
so there's a couple different things. There's a couple different, I'd say, properties that have just not only influenced my style, just my approach to things, and really those have been influencers for particular items. So one of them is Dragon Ball Z is probably like one of the biggest all time. Like Dragon Ball Z, I've got a story that is essentially will be like my magna opus, whatever you want to call it. Like that's going to be my thing. That if I die, this is the one thing that I want to get done. It's super heavily influenced by Dragon Ball Z. The next thing I'd probably say is The Lord of the Rings. Huge Tolkien fan, huge C.S.
I
Lewis
love
fan, huge
talking.
Tolkien
Yes.
nerd. I just got the Silmarillion, so I haven't read the Silmarillion yet. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos on it. I'm like, I need to actually sit down and read it. I've also got my Amazon cart, like the this thick level of Middle Earth history. So I'll eventually deep dive that in like some years. But huge Tolkien nerd, love Tolkien. So I'd say him and C.S. Lewis have been massive literary influences the last 2 or 3 years of my life. I've done a lot of deep dives on
Two of
them,
my
and
favorite
I love it.
authors.
So you get it. Like I've spent like a lot of time in the last 2 years looking how they approached it, the Inklings as a whole, but like a lot of like YouTube videos, the Prancing Pony on podcast, the Theology podcast. There's a few others just trying to really dive into how Tolkien approached story. And then I say the last one out of all the books or comics that have really influenced me, and I have the script done, and I'm hoping to get an artist and hopefully release it because this like nearly is the biggest influence for this book is Vagabond. It's a manga. It's incomplete and it sucks because it's never going to be finished. It is by far one of the best visual stories I've ever read. It is literally like looking at artistic poetry in motion, the details, the level of like details in hair and the lining and the details that are just done overall in the story is fantastic. I've never seen a more impressive piece of artwork visually as well as story-wise than Vagabond, which is based off of Musashi, the samurai warrior, and taking like his stories and blending it together. Unfortunately, it's one of those books that will probably never get done. But Vagabond is a huge influence, especially then you get started like Eastern philosophy and stuff like that. I'm a huge Taoist and Zen Buddhist nerd. Huge martial arts history nerd, so I spent a lot of time, Shaolin Temple, history of karate, Okinawa, all those good stuff. So Vagabond hits all those points.
It's a behind the scenes fact about this book that fans will never guess.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna leave an Easter egg for people instead. So the villain, who, as you read it, he has a name. That name is based on a real life bad guy. Now, in that real life bad guy, there are also names, and this is kind of again my homage to people and trying to give honor to people who were killed unjustly. Three of those characters show up in the book, and their names associate to this bad guy from some real life events. I would like to see if people could tie them together. So again, the bad guy of the book, I'm not saying his name, you'll figure it out as you read. The bad guy of the book, the big Klansman bad guy, he is based on a real life Klansman bad guy, and he unfortunately is attached to some deaths, some individuals who unfortunately lost their lives. So my way of kind of repaying them and giving them a little bit of life back is to insert them in the story. They do not die in the story, so FYI, but just to insert them and again give them life and some historical context. There are three names that are associated to them. So if you can figure them out, that is the Easter egg. So it's not really a fun fact or truth, but something interesting for people to look up.
Tell us where we can follow you on social media to keep up with your projects and what
Yeah, absolutely. So CE Massari on Instagram and Facebook, that is where I'm the most active. I put up videos, lots of preview pages on Instagram and Facebook about the book itself. And then on Substack, Master of None, because I'm good at a lot of things, but not quite actually good at any one thing. So if you like philosophy of Superman, I've got a cool essay on that. If you like seeing how the Greek philosopher Diogenes is related to South Park, got a cool article on that. If you want to see how J.R.R. Tolkien and pro wrestling relate, I do a deep dive on that. So a lot of random different articles, and sometimes I'll put up some recipes and stuff that I cook. Love of the Philadelphia Eagles, lots of different things. My Substack is the place to go for scripts, writing, philosophy, theology, all that good stuff. Like I said, once we hit 50 for the Kickstarter, the pre-launch, the first day backers and the followers, you will get a free annual subscription to my Substack, The Master of None, as part of my gift to you. And thank you for backing. So Substack, Master of None, CE Massari, and then Facebook and Instagram, CE Massari as well.
Mr. Masseri, thank you so much for going on. Excited for this book. I'm excited to read it, and you guys should too. And so we'll see you guys next time.
Appreciate it.